glad to see you all today. And thank you all for your football comments. We have a lot to cover today. I think a really interesting agenda. So I'm just going to say welcome to everyone and start off with some general Rails news. As always, as you have already been doing, use the chat if you want to make a comment or ask a question. We'll be monitoring that. As you know, we're all getting pretty good at this, I think. We'll keep up with the questions and comments as best we can. If we don't get to you right away, we will get to you eventually, even if it ends up being after the meeting. So without further ado, so general Rails news, the budget and funding. So the good news, really good news and unexpected by me anyway, was that at our last board meeting, Greg McCormick from the State Library did tell us that the budget was not going to be cut this year, and that they have been, and this is all, of course, as of today, requested to submit a level budget for next year as well. So, I mean, it remains to be seen what will happen. There was some other good news the other day that the state revenue was not as down as far as they thought it was going to be. So that is all really good for all of us. Obviously, good for everybody in the state, not just libraries. We had planned, as I have mentioned before, we had, deferred expenditures, and we're, expecting, to, hoping not to, but, prepared to make cuts if we had to. So this is great. Of course, we will continue to be very careful, as we always have been. This doesn't mean that our cash flow is any better than it was. We never know when the payments will come. Fortunately, we do have some reserve, so we're not in any danger. But it's still we're going to keep a close eye on it. So I see that, yes, and thanks for all the comments, that it is good news. And to Tiffany, the LSEP grants were not cut at all. Nothing's been cut. So they never were not fully funded. So we can always talk about that more offline or later on if we need to. So so that's that. So that's the budget and funding update. I also want to just tell you about something that we've been working on, which is some efforts to gather school library data. We've been having regular meetings with IL staff and officers for, I'd say, almost a year now, and ILA staff have joined us as well. And a recurring theme is that we don't know what, how many school libraries we have. We don't know how many school libraries have staff, let alone what school libraries have certified librarian staff. Obviously, this has only gotten worse since the pandemic started, because we know anecdotally, at least, that libraries are being turned into classrooms, and library staff are being asked to do different things instead of just be librarians. So we really are working hard to figure out a way to get this information. We had a really interesting call last week with Heartland, and they've been part of our meetings with IL all along as well. And the State Library and Keith Curry Lance, who is a noted library data guru from California, Colorado. And he's been working on a school library data national survey called SLIDE, which I believe stands for School Library Information, something like that. Decline or evolution, or disappearing. Are they disappearing or are they evolving? And what he told us was that they have missing data in this study, and he had reached out to ISLE because apparently half of the missing data about school libraries nationwide is from Illinois. So this was not surprising to us, but it's very depressing. It was very depressing to ISLE as well. So we are currently Grant Halter, as you know, our data analysis manager. He and our IT guys are working on trying to get some information out of ISBE, the Board of Education here in Illinois. Because obviously we really need to have as accurate school library data as we can. I mean, we need to have accurate data about all libraries in Illinois so that we understand, not only, who is being served and who isn't being served, but just how we can better support the libraries that are here, and how we can help to, keep libraries from not disappearing. So we'll see how this goes. We need to be able to tell this story and to explain the consequences of not having school libraries, because we all, we're all in this together. If kids don't learn how to use the library, how to do research, etc., at the school library, then how are they going to be able to use a public library or a college library, etc.? So we need each other. So just wanted to update you about that. And thanks, Joe, for putting that in the chat. You can see some of Keith's previous work. So that's what I wanted to say for now. And Monica is going to update us about the Ebook Grant.
Good morning, all. I know during the member update last month, we did announce about the Rails Ebook Grant for $125,000. The funding for that grant was awarded by the Illinois State Library, which is a department of the Office of the Secretary of State, using funds provided by IMLS under the provisions of the CARES Act. But so Anna Beam, Layla Heath, and Grant Halter here at Rails have been working together on continuing to move the great process forward. And so materials are focused on the K through 12 audience. And that is mostly to support a majorly increased need for that K through 12 material through the pandemic and through school and public libraries, as well as we've even heard from community college collections who've really seen an increase in the need for K through 12 from some of their literature collections. So we're very excited that that process is continuing to move forward. In December, Rails purchased $23,296 worth of ebooks and audiobooks for the grant collection. And that initially our spread came a little more heavily on the audiobook side compared to ebooks, but what we expect is that will equalize throughout the process, and eventually ebooks purchased for this program will outnumber the audiobooks that will be available. We do have recommendations available. So if you are part of eRead and you would like to make recommendations of K through 12 material for the grant, we encourage you to do so. We received a lot of recommendations in December. Thank you so much to those of you who sent those in. And they have slowed down a bit throughout the month. So we do want to make sure that you can continue to send in what you need and what your communities need. We'd love to take a look at that as well. Just for a little bit of information, 252 public libraries and 191 school libraries are members of eRead, with another 38 libraries currently in the midst of the sign-up process. And since the announcement of the grant, we have also onboarded, I think, an additional 16 school libraries, and there have been lots of other libraries contacting us about eRead and what is available there. So just a note, if you have some information, you'd like to share that as well. We also want to announce that another exciting development development of the project was the opportunity to do a deeper analysis of this grant collection as part of the process. So final purchasing for the grant will finish up in May, just in advance of summer reading and the fiscal year. But we can expect a final analysis of the process to incorporate the performance of different materials by format, audience, geography of where these materials are being checked out, and then perpetual versus limited use material. And we are planning to share our findings on that. So we're very excited not only for the process of sharing these materials, but also sharing the information of how these materials are being used. I do also want to encourage you that if you are interested in ebooks and particularly ebook usage during the pandemic, to check out the report on the impact of COVID-19 related closures on library e-content usage. That was written by Rails e-content specialist Anna Beam, and includes a lot of great information that was also done in cooperation with Grant Halter from September 2020. I can see there's a question in the chat about how many materials were added. There were 906 copies total of ebooks and audiobooks that were added just in the month of December for the grant collection. And then if anybody else has any other questions about the ebook grant, excuse me, I'm happy to answer them.
You haven't spent all the money, right?
Nope, no, it's being spent monthly through May. So it's $125,000 total, but we've spent $23,296.
So it's going to be a robust collection, that's for sure. I mean, it already was, but this is really great. Promo materials.
Yes. And we are interested in continuing to create additional promo materials. Of course, these materials will be added to the collection and for use after May. And so those promo materials, will continue to be helpful, I think, throughout the process. So I can see a couple of questions in the chat. One is, are these copies ones we will own in the system, or are they based off of CERC usage and will eventually expire? Just because of limitations from the publishing industry, it is a mix of perpetual use and then also more limited use materials. And that's just because of limitations of what's available and trying to balance interest in what's needed and what can be offered. The question about, was the highlights bingo package added? Nancy, I am not sure if that particular product was added, but we can get back to you on that. If you have an interest in that, we can take a look as well. Do libraries register for use through Rails? Yes. If you are interested in e-read, we can have a conversation with you about what that would entail for your library and community. So please reach out to Anna Beam. And Anna, if you would put your contact information there in the chat, that would be really helpful. Otherwise, I'll grab it and do it after this. And then where and how will these promotional materials be available? We'll talk a little bit more once we have those available, and we will be certain to let you know through our channels when we can start to promote that. We are looking at that right now as we develop more information about what we're collecting, and we have that available to share with your communities in a way that hopefully they'll find useful. Thank you, Anna. Any other questions about the grant?
Or about anything else so far?
Yeah.
Okay, well, if you think of something, put it in the chat and we'll get back to it. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to move on now to the 2021 certification requirements for all libraries, but particularly for Rails libraries. We do have a lot of information to share. Brian Smith is going to do a demo in a little bit, but I just wanted to give you an overview. The certification period does start officially on February 15th, and it will end on May 15th. We're having this conversation today so that we can, try to answer your questions, preemptively, proactively before you try to start doing it. So it is on a new platform, or a different platform. It's on L2. One of the new L2, obviously, one of the ongoing complaints and very justified complaints that we heard from you all was that you had so many different logins that you had to go to for different things. So, so it's now on L2 and you go in with your L2 login, obviously. Um, the other thing to know is that Rails, Beth Teppin, yes, that's and we're hoping yes, but that's also a problem in terms of certification helping to close the gap on information, because we don't know if we have the, contact information that we need for certification. So yes, so Beth Teppin asked if certification would help to close the gap on information for the Keith Curry Lamps study. And yes, except that, like I say, that depends on what our, how good our contact information is. And we've been working on that, and the State Library has done a big research project on that as well. Everybody, please change your chat setting to all panelists and attendees so everybody can see all the questions. Thank you. Anyway, so, we've been working on standards for years. And we finally, a couple of years ago, or year and a half or so ago, came to the realization, the conclusion that what we really needed to do first was gather information. Again, back to that, we need to understand the situation that libraries are in first before we can really establish reasonable standards as a system. So we're going to start asking additional questions every year to get more information. This year it's for public libraries. This is informational only. It has nothing to do with system membership. It's informational only. Obviously, this ties in with the State Library has also sort of enhanced or increased their use of the ILA serving our public standard/guidelines in order to also get a better understanding of where libraries are. That obviously only affects public libraries. We have members of all types, and as I've already said, the school library piece is really important. But we're starting with public, and so we are asking some additional questions. As I said, they're informational only, and they are related to collection expenditures, operating budget, experience and education of the director, the hours open, and then, so those are the new Rails questions. And then there's also a new question that is a statewide question that is related to, it's asking whether libraries, and I'm not going to say it right, so maybe I should just wait until we get the form up, but it's related to whether your library collection is accessible beyond your building. This was put in the administrative rules, I think, 7 years ago. And this was the year that it was supposed to take effect. And so it is. So, Brian, do you want to start sharing the form? And he's going to do a demo of how this will work.
Sure. Before I get started with the demo, just want to mention a couple things. As Deirdre said, certification will begin on February 15th. However, before then, there are a couple of things that you can do to prepare. First is to make sure that the person or people who will be completing certification for your library that their L2 accounts are actually set up to be certification contacts so that they can do it. I will show you how to do that in just a moment. The second thing is to complete the ILLinet ILL traffic survey for your library before doing certification, because one of the certification requirements is that your library has completed the traffic survey. So it's a good idea to to do that before you start certification. And you would complete the Illinois traffic survey through Counting Opinions and the link and information that is on the Illinois State Library's website. We did have a question about whether that's through L2. That is not. So for the ILL traffic survey, you still go through the Illinois State Library's website. And now I'm going to share my screen. Okay, you should be seeing library directory and learning calendar on screen now. This is not the actual live L2 website, but it's our test and demonstration version of it that I'm using for this demonstration here. It is the exact same thing that you will be seeing on the real L2. As you can see, I'm logged in here as an account who is set up as a certification contact for the new Lenox Public Library. So I see right at the top of the home page a link and information about completing the annual certification. Everybody who goes to L2 will see a message about certification on the home page as well. We'll be adding information to this message as we approach February 15th. As I had mentioned, you want to make sure that whoever's going to be doing the certification is set up to do that on L2. And I'm going to go into the account menu here, my dashboard, and here is my alter ego that I use for demonstration purposes. And you can see in my account information here, I'm affiliated with New Lenox Public Library District. I am in there as a certification contact. If you're going to be doing certification and you're not a certification contact, you can edit your affiliation with your library's primary location. And so I click edit there. And if you scroll down, you'll see this key contact regional system, and you just need to check certification contact and then save, and you'll be all set there. And then you will have the link there, both on the home page, and it'll also be on your user dashboard page too. You click on that link to certify.
Who's not seeing the screen? Sorry, Brian.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Are people not seeing the screen? I'm only seeing, okay. Okay, well, I don't understand why you don't see it. Okay, I guess it looks like most people can see it, so we'll keep going. And if somebody needs a better, more help later on, we're happy to provide it. Go ahead, Brian, sorry.
Okay, and the screen sharing will appear in the recording.
Right.
And I'll also have about an 11-minute recording going through certification as well that will be available. So anyway, when you click on the complete certification for your library link, you get the certification form. Certain fields are unchangeable in the form. Those have a colored background to those fields. So you see I cannot change the control number for this library, can't change what system it's in, can't change a public library to being a school library, etc. So those fields you cannot change. All of the fields that do not have the colored background, those are fields that you can edit if you need to correct them or add information to them. Where possible, we've pre-populated information from the L2 directory data, so hopefully you won't need to change much, if any, of the pre-populated fields. Fields that are required will either have a red asterisk or other label letting you know that you do need to complete them. So these fields you can change if you need to. Information about the library's primary building, which is either your main location, or for public school districts, it's going to be the district office. Something that's new that was not available previously is libraries that have a different mailing address from your building's physical address, there is a checkbox here that you can check that and open up fields to add your library's mailing address. Library director information is pre-populated from L2 as well. You do need to select an honorific prefix for the library director and other contacts here. Again, other fields that are required have the asterisk next to them. We do have, you may notice as I'm scrolling down, there's a little question mark icon next to certain fields. And for those fields, there's a pop-up help if you click on that icon or hover over it. Certification contact information will be populated from the person who's actually here working on the certification form. Public libraries will have a group of fields for the library board president. This was on the old certification as well. If there is a library board president for the library in the L2 data already, that will be pre-populated. This particular library does not have that, so we'll need a board president entered in here. Then the system membership compliance, the statewide requirements that come from the Illinois Administrative Code. And the previous certification form, these were yes/no questions, but because they're actually requirements, we've changed that to be a checkbox, and you do need to check all of these boxes to complete your certification. And as you see, all of these items have that help icon that you can hover over to get some additional information. One of the items, as I'd mentioned, we recommend that you complete the ILLINET ILL traffic survey before doing certification, just because we have this item saying that your library has completed it. And if your library has done the statistical survey, I guess, at least a few days ago, we are populating the ILLINET traffic survey completions into L2 and the certification forms. So say if your library completed the traffic survey back in October, we'll know that already, and that item will be automatically checked so that you don't have to go back and try to remember whether you've done that already. There will be different items for different library types, so only public libraries will have the item about public libraries, etc. And as I'd mentioned, all of these checkboxes need to be checked for completing certification. And as Deidre mentioned, there's the new certification requirement about having your library's new acquisitions in a shared bibliographic database. If your library is in a shared catalog consortium like SWAN, Prairie Cat, RSA, etc., or if your library has holdings in OCLC WorldCat, or if your library participates in Find More Illinois, this item should be automatically checked for you that your library already participates. If it's not checked, there will be a couple other options that you plan in the future before March 31st, 2022 to get your new acquisitions in a shared bibliographic database, or you do not plan. One of these three options does need to be selected. It does not affect your membership or certification which one of them you select. However, if you're not currently in a shared bibliographic database, you will need to provide some additional information about your plans. As Deidre mentioned, for Rails public libraries, we do have some additional questions that are on the certification form for you. These are to help us help Rails work for you better. Your answers to these questions do not affect your certification or membership status, but you do need to answer them if you're a public library in Rails. And at the bottom of the form, you can save the certification form if you haven't completed it, so that if you need to come back to it later, all you would do is just click the Save Submit Incomplete button. If you found that you could not check some of the boxes on the form and cannot fully complete certification, we do have an option here, Unable to Complete Certification. So you would check that box, click Save Submit Incomplete, and somebody from Rails will follow up with you about that. If you have checked everything and all required fields are complete, then you can check Complete Certification Now, and you're acknowledging that your everything on the form's true to the best of your knowledge, and then submit the form. And that, in a nutshell, is how the certification process is going to be working.
Thank you, Brian. That was great.
And I see we do have some questions.
Yes, there was one about what is the operating budget, and just to reiterate what Brian said, there are helping definitions, whatever you want to term them, for the questions that we ask about operating budget and collection expenditures.
Yeah, there is the help icon available for all of those Rails specific questions.
Will we have confirmation once certification is submitted? I know this was a yes, right?
Yes, yes. Once you submit the completed certification, you'll have an on-screen message that hooray, you've completed certification, and L2 will also automatically send you an email that you have completed certification.
And Tim, no, not all of the information is in IPLAR. And I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, oh, they're asking questions, for the per capita grant. They're asking questions in IPLAR. They're asking questions for this. They're asking questions for that. That's true. We're collecting data. We'll continue to assess, everything that is in certification. We appreciate your completing these surveys, the certification, etc. It's really important for us to understand where you all are at, as well as it's important for the state library and for ILA, so that we can continue to try to serve you better as your situations change. Yes, the survey explains what is included in the collection budget. Yes, exactly.
Deirdre, there was also this question, I don't think we've got to this, the question about accessible outside the library. Is that related to resource sharing, digitization, or something else? And then she says a collection.
I don't understand. It's related to resource sharing. I mean, I don't know what you mean exactly by digitization. That was Kathy Rogie, right? I mean, this is
correct. Yeah, she asked an original question, right. Then she tried to clarify it a bit.
Right. I'm hoping that now that you've seen that it doesn't matter. No, the part of the, I understand. I didn't understand, Kathy, if you meant digital resources. You mean your actual collection digitized? No, that's not the focus here. And I think we've cleared that up. But thanks for that. That's an interesting question. Yeah.
Oh, and there is a, there's a question. It looks like it may have been answered about, there's a step before just clicking on and filling out the form itself. You do need to be logged into L2 and have that certification contact checked in your profile. But yeah, if you have that checked and you're logged into L2, you'll see that link there.
So again, I want to thank you for filling this out. I hope that this has been helpful. I know I sound like a broken record, but we really are trying to do more to get accurate information. we hope this has helped. We wanted to do this, as I said before, before we actually open up certification. Obviously, if you have more questions now, please put them in the chat. If things come up later on, as always, I mean, of course they will when you're actually engaged in doing certification, but we'll get back to you as soon as we can. We do expect, we've had several calls with the State Library and with Heartland about this new certification form and platform. We're also all extremely aware of the difficulties that many libraries have faced this past year. And we have every intention of being extremely understanding, lenient, etc. I think is a fair word in terms of whether you're able to meet certification, frankly. And certainly that's going to be a huge issue for I think school libraries as well, but for all libraries, because you've been closed. A lot of libraries have been closed, some still are. So but again, this information of what your year was actually like will be extremely helpful for us to know. It will probably be very distressing, but it's better to know, because then we can deal with it. So is there anything you want to say about this, Greg? You don't have to, but I just didn't want to. If I said everything that correctly as far as you're concerned, would you say?
No, I think that these are all very good comments. I would hope that, we see a better marriage of the data that we're all collecting, whether it's in the Public Library Annual Report, in certification, and what we learned from the Public Library per capita grant applications this year as they relate to the standards. So.
Right. So we're all working together on this, and we will continue to adapt as needed.
Oh, Deirdre,
Yeah.
one other thing I'd like to mention, because I know we've had questions, we have received questions about it in the past. If regarding the Illinois ILL traffic survey, if your library has not been doing ILLs because of COVID and closures, basically when you're doing the traffic survey, you just need to say that on the traffic survey.
That's correct, and we expect to see a lot of that this year.
Right. Okay. Great. So if you have more questions, as time, and I'm sure you will, reach out to me or Emily or Joe or Monica, whoever your go-to person at Rails is, and we'll get you the answer. Thanks for all the questions and comments. Okay, so we are going to move on to the report from the Illinois State Library, specifically related to the non-resident administrative rules and the per capita grant application. If you have questions, I do want to be sure to point out to you that the comment period for the draft administrative rules is over. They're not taking any more comments. So, I don't know, Greg will provide you with an update, but I just don't want you to expect something that isn't possible. So I think I'll just turn it over to you, Greg.
Well, thank you. And thank you for asking us to participate today and provide an update on these two issues. So first of all, on the non-resident rules, yes, the first filing has been completed. The comment period was over January 15th. I will say that we did receive a number of very good comments, very good questions. There are a few that we still have to respond to. We are trying to take that information that we received and either look to see if modifications are necessary to what was filed initially, and then also to make certain that in certain areas, those questions that remained are included in an overall FAQ document for non-resident services so that we're not overlooking anything. We've gone as far as even taking the text from the chats from those presentations from the library system meetings to make sure that we haven't overlooked anything, and actually have identified a couple of questions that still we need to respond to from those initial conversations with the greater library community. There ended up being well over 500 attendees between the two library systems. So pretty lengthy session. So, but we do appreciate everything. There's a couple of things that, we must keep in mind. So yes, there are a new version of it, or a first filing of administrative rules for the non-resident services, but there are certain components about that are in effect regardless. The Cards for Kids piece, that legislation was included in a mandatory language and is in effect, and the administrative rules really are just a manner in which it explains how a public library may enforce that at the local level or adopt those procedures at the local level. Similarly, with the e-resources piece, and I think I will address that first. Again, that was the e-resources piece that was included in the administrative rules was a response to a question that was raised, could this be done? And it was the current legal counsel's opinion here in our office that yes, within certain parameters, that could be done. There have been a lot of questions about, is this a mandate? It is not a mandate, regardless that it is a local decision to determine if this is possible, what those parameters would be. Is it a piece of your e-resources, is it all of your e-resources? And those decisions will have to be made locally. It's also important to note that if the legal interpretation is that this can be done, even if there is no absent administrative rule regarding this, a public library could move forward with this process. It's really the administrative rule is, again, trying to clarify the parameters under which a public library might do that. Specific to the Cards for Kids issue, again, it's important to note this is in effect. And really what that language said in the law, it is an exemption of the fee for the non-resident card that public libraries may issue. It's not necessarily an additional program or a new program. It's simply, the language was added as an exemption of the fee. One clarification that I know that will be forthcoming will likely be a change for the age group. It will be pre-K to 12, consistent with what we've looked further as far as the school lunch program. And regarding the schools, another consistent question that we're going to be working with the library systems, and I'm going to be meeting, I think, with your unserved group sooner in the coming weeks, where this will have to be a topic of discussion, is there was a lot of conversation and a lot of questions about school districts that are within multiple library districts or library service areas. That's actually a good question that has been raised consistently, and it's caused a lot of conversation because it really goes back to non-resident services, period. The administrative rules that were adopted in 2001, 20 years ago now, were addressing that issue. And maybe it's just caused more conversation about that now, since people are looking at what is the possible impact for the Cards for Kids legislation. But the regional library systems have a very significant role in that. I've spoken both to Rails and to Heartland about that. That's, again, nothing new, but there doesn't seem to be any record of historic conversations that can be documented at either of the library systems or from the predecessor systems, where a lot of that would have actually occurred and been worked out prior to the merger into Rails and Heartland. So there's a lot of work and some discussion that needs to be done about that, as well as what would occur if there is no public library offering non-resident cards in a specific area or a school district. Again, the regional library system is to work that out with the local library. So much more information to come about that and work to be done. What are the next steps? We're still awaiting any formal comments from the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules. We're not even certain if they will have comments that they will provide back to us. Ultimately, we would have a year from the November filing to finalize these rules, but we do not want to wait that long. We want to move this forward. There's too many questions that need to be answered. I think one question, and a fair question too, is, if this is in effect, how many libraries have even been approached about this yet? Or I know that in the comments we did receive from one library, it was very apparent they were going to be addressing this as it was stated in the law. But so we'll probably be looking back to the library systems maybe again for more information. And it may be something that in the future, because we do collect non-resident card information as part of the public library annual report, we may be looking for future subsets so that we can look at what the impact of cards for kids was on non-resident services or public library services at the local level. That's going to be useful information, I think, to have to address the impact of this legislation on public library services across the state. So, and that's really all I have to share on that particular topic right now. More information will be coming from our office and from the library systems on this. As far as the next topic, public library per capita grant applications for FY21. Again, we reviewed with you what those changes were. It was based upon the new standards that were adopted by the Illinois Library Association and put into effect. Many people that are participating today probably had some influence in development of those standards. And it's looking at the standards as a whole. I will say, at this point, we're way ahead in receiving applications this year. We've already received and reviewed about 20% of what we expect for the year, with the due date being March 15th. There haven't been any significant questions raised in those. It's been pretty straightforward with what has been submitted so far. So I don't foresee significant issues with that. I think the questions will be, I did verify too today, what are any libraries yet documenting or attempting to document new census data? We're not seeing that. So, and actually I would guess that because of the certification that will be necessary, that's going to really be the impact for FY22. So.
There is a question here from Carol and Coulter, Greg, about the, for you, is there any more word on the waiver for ILL and reciprocal borrowing, the current waiver having expired in October?
Well, we have not enacted or requested another administrative rule. And actually we would, at this point, we couldn't do an emergency filing. It would have to be something more permanent. So, it is not. So I think, as we indicated earlier, what we're going to see in the ILL survey is there are going to be big gaps, regardless of what type of library is. And, depending upon the level of service that they were allowed to do in person, it's just going to be an interesting year. Right. And we'll see the end result. There's going to be no harm to a library because it appears they didn't fulfill what are traditionally the requirements of that for library system membership.
Right, that would be the last thing that a library would need, so, or a library user. Let's see, we have a question about the date that it was discussed with the per capita grant was discussed with the board. is this in the new, or is it required in the new application?
I don't recall that being in the new application. I think it was assumed by the questions, because there are so many questions that say the board and or staff would be reviewing this, that the submission date is where at the submission date we've been assured you've reviewed with the board at that time.
Will Rails or the State Library be putting out an information document for these changes in the administrative rules? Those things are helpful when advocating for expanding services to folks like school superintendents. Yeah, yeah, we're working on all kinds of documentation and promotional material, for lack of a better word, but it's not all done yet. I think, if you want to talk to people, you can say, this exists, we can do this for you. And, we get these questions too. When do we need to do this by? Well, you can do it now. It's in effect. It's just that the rules telling you exactly how you might want to do it are not finalized. That doesn't mean you can't make, draft something up that works for you and then, amend it if need be. I know some places have done that. Aaron wants to know if Cards for Kids question, should we go to Joe Natale?
I think that's still probably the safe place to send questions to, so that we can address them. They won't be considered as part of the formal comment period for the administrative rules, but then he can parse those questions out to appropriate people here at the State Library to address for that person who's asking the question.
Well, thank you. Let's see. Will the rules include specific information as what makes a child eligible for this program?
Yes, that's the point of clarification from what the legislation says.
Is there sample language for policy changes?
So that must be from the previous discussion we had about public libraries may want to adopt policies for cards that they issue for different age groups. Now, those would have to be enforced for residents and non-residents. Or whatever is done for a non-resident age group would have to be consistent for the resident age group. We have not given any formal policies, but we know they exist. You can look on many public library websites and view those as we've done. We've not, no one collects those, but we've actually gone out and thank goodness, we've gone out and actually, and I have too, looked at some of those. I've looked at Champaign, some of the libraries around the state to see exactly what they have.
Joliet, I know Joliet has a robust program.
I believe, Joe, you could chime in. I think Aurora has something, maybe not.
Joe Philippek.
Yes.
Well, he's not chiming, but I think they do, yes. Thank you, Michaela.
All right.
Yes. So I think, maybe there's something we can put on the Rails website that would help you all to find the samples. I'm sorry, Michaela from Aurora Public Library said, yes, they do have policies on their website. Like I say, I know for a fact that Joliet has some as well. So we'll see what we can do if we can gather up a few. Other questions for Greg at this point about this? Are there suggestions on how to promote Cards for Kids and get the necessary info without crossing privacy boundaries? My school system has been reluctant to share info.
Well, again, the promotion piece is going to be something that's going to be determined at the local level, because it's not a program that must be promoted. It's a question that the library must be able to respond to if they're presented with an applicant who is requesting exemption from this fee. Working with the school system, that is something that we're having to address specifically in the area where they've adopted the community provision for reduced in school lunch programs. We're going to have to work that out.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the privacy concerns are, very understandable, but I'm sure that, for the good of this program, so that locally, hopefully people can work things out. Families receive a letter from ISBE that says they qualify for free and reduced lunch. We are accepting that at Glen Ellen. Yep. So it's up to the family to present it, in other words, not the school. Yeah, well, okay. Well, this is an evolving issue. I think it's, great to have this kind of program. I wish it weren't just, I wish it were broader, but it's, everything helps. So anything else for Greg at this point? We're going to move on to talking about COVID and the vaccine, and Julie Tappendorf is patiently waiting to talk about the legal aspect of vaccinations and employees. So Catherine says to all panelists and attendees, but not, well, at Joliet, we've asked for a data set of only addresses against which to match our student applicants. Parents and or guardians are required to fill out the application for their child or children, and the patrons have to answer yes or no to whether they qualify for reduced or free lunches. We trust them. If yes, they get the card. If no, they don't. Hey, Catherine, you want to put that, you want to change your setting to all panelists and attendees and just plop that in that as well. And I think that's exactly what people are looking for. Okay, then we'll move on. Thank you, Greg, as always.
Thank you.
So, okay, so the libraries and the vaccine. So just quickly before we get to Julie, as I think you all know, ILA did send a letter asking, I guess, IDPH to prioritize library workers for vaccines. They also created letters for libraries to use locally. We are certainly advocating for this as well. I do know that some counties have moved forward with specifically prioritizing libraries or types of libraries. For example, I heard yesterday from Paul Mills that Will County has put school librarians in 1B, I think he said, and I think I heard that DuPage has done something. So this is happening. I think we need to keep the pressure on. We have a board member at Rails who works at the Cook County Public Health Agency, and I'm bothering him daily. So, we'll see where we get with all of this. And this is, yes, thank you, Paul. School libraries are 1B in Will County. And Kevin Davis says that DuPage Health now lists libraries as well for the COVID vaccine. So this progress, I think, peer pressure. No, but we have not gotten anything from Cook County, but we're going to keep trying. And hopefully maybe these, what other counties are doing is, maybe we'll put pressure on the other counties. So we'll stay, we're going to keep working on that. So we can talk more about that if we want after, but I do want to turn it over to Julie to talk about library personnel policies and the vaccine, because we've heard a lot of questions about this, and this is going to come up more and more, I think. So Julie, thanks for being so patient, and there you are.
Hello, everybody. Very interesting. So I was just stealthily listening to everything as it was going on. So it was a great program so far. So I'm going to try to share my screen here so we can, let's see, pull up my PowerPoint. Assume everybody can see that okay? All right. So a couple of introductory remarks. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Julie Tappendorf. I'm an equity partner at Ansel Glink, and I represent municipalities, library districts, municipal libraries, and other government bodies in pretty much anything that comes up government related. So, every day is a new day. It's a very interesting line of work because there's just it's never boring, the issues that come up. One of obviously the issues that we have all been dealing with for about a year are the impacts of COVID. And in the beginning, we were talking, and some of you, go back in the time machine, but last March, we were talking about closures, library closures. When, what do we do? What do we do with the employees? Do we lay them off? Do we pay them? Then it went through, okay, now we can open up for curbside. What does that mean? How does the state identify libraries? And now we're moving into issues with the vaccine and vaccinating our employees, obviously patrons being vaccinated, the issues that Dee just talked about with respect to where people are in the order of prioritization. But what I'm going to talk about today is the employer-employee relationship with respect to vaccinations. So it's a little more focused discussion. There's obviously a lot going on. People want to know when they're going to get the vaccine. So much of that depends on the prioritization at the state level, but also each individual county, because I'm hearing very different, I live and work in Cook County, and the rules in Cook County are different even than Kane. My husband is a EMS chief for the city of Aurora. Of course, he's in charge of all of the COVID related issues, and the rules in Kane County and how they're dealing with it are very different than how they're dealing with it in Cook and everywhere else. So you will need to identify which county you live and frankly work, because you may qualify for a vaccine in a county where you work before you might in the county that you live. Based on whether you're an essential worker or not. So those are things you have to kind of look into. I want to talk more about this employee-employer relationship, and you as the employer, and as an employee, how you might deal with some of the legal issues. So I'm just going to put in a plug, as I always do, for the blog that I write called Municipal Minute. So those of you that don't subscribe to that, I try to post something every day about government issues, all sorts of things about cases and laws and some COVID related issues. So you might check that out. And before I jump into this, as I'm sure you know, there's a lot we don't know yet. It's not as if we've had this kind of a situation with a global pandemic every couple of years and we can dust off a plan. So even the government agencies that we rely on, in this case, it might be some of the state agencies, it might be the federal government, EEOC for employment related issues, OSHA for workplace safety. They're struggling with the same issues we are, which is there's not a lot of history. There's not a lot of law on this. And so I think we do the best we can. So if I may not be able to answer all of your questions, just because not for lack of trying to find some information, but because we just don't know. But we do have some guidance. And I think for those of you that, if you're in HR, you have to deal with employees, there is some information on the EEOC website, pretty significant amount of information. They have a FAQ that I know is very helpful for us at Ansel Glink when we get questions. And I've linked to that in one of the slides. So I'll show you where that information is. So jumping into a mandate, and this is a question we're getting a lot from especially from municipalities, but also from our other government clients. Can we mandate that all or some of our employees receive the vaccine? And the answer seems to be yes. And it's not based specifically on this vaccine, but on the standard that the government agencies have set for when an employer can require employees to be vaccinated. And the history could be vaccinations for the flu, or some of the other vaccinations that healthcare workers have to get, that they're mandated to get. That the standards are the same. So that's what we're using to apply to whether or not an employer can require employees to have their employees get vaccinated. And the standard is whether your particular employee poses a direct threat to themselves or others by their physical presence in the workplace without being vaccinated. So really what you're looking at is if you had an employee who was 100% work from home, it's not likely that you could use this standard to require them to get a vaccination. If you had an employee that maybe worked out in the field, but wasn't really, having any kind of a close relationship or close contact with coworkers or patrons or customers, then it's going to be hard to satisfy this standard. But if your employees have close contact with other employees throughout the day, if they're front facing with customers or patrons, there's a better likelihood that you can meet this standard. And how the EEOC applies this is they look at in the context of mandating vaccines, they look at whether the employee, and again, this is a contact issue, whether there's a significant risk or substantial harm to the health or safety of that employee. So not just that they might spread, something, but also that they may be impacted and get the virus, or to others that cannot be eliminated or reduced by reasonable accommodation. Reasonable accommodation may be a work from home. It may be, a separate office space. It may be other restrictions and limitations that you put in place. So what we're seeing is that to the extent that you can meet the standard for that the EEOC and courts have set in looking at other vaccines, that you can, as an employer, require your employees to be vaccinated. Now, in practice, it's not so simple. So, in practice, we all know, because Dee was just talking about this, it's not as if we can all drive to CVS or Walgreens today to get a vaccine. It's not as if an employer or we can send all of our employees to their doctors or to some other site and be vaccinated today. So, from a practical perspective, this is the legal perspective that if you can meet the standard, if you can satisfy and demonstrate that, you could require it. Practically, does it make sense to mandate a vaccine right now when there's such a limited supply? It's going to be really hard to enforce it. So later, we'll talk a little more about, the difference between mandating and encouraging, or adopting a policy that encourages employees to get it when they're available. So the other issue, we talked about the standard, but to talk about mandatory vaccination, which employees can you require to vaccinate? And what we are seeing so far, at least for those employers that are mandating or are considering mandating, they look frontline healthcare workers. I mean, this is a no-brainer. To the extent that you have EMS, if you're a hospital and you have healthcare workers, mandating them to receive vaccinations seems to make a lot of sense and certainly would fall within the standard. There's a lot of talk about requiring teachers to do this as well, to get the vaccines, to make sure that we can open up schools and get kids back into schools. So I think there's some talk about that. I'm not seeing a lot of action. And again, I think that that's a more practical and less legal issue. Although there's still, obviously, especially for teachers and some other public entities, there's still the issue of working through collective bargaining agreements and some of those issues. We've talked about it with respect to a lot of our clients with collective bargaining agreements or union agreements with the unions, that we think that this is not a subject of mandatory bargaining, but it might be something that you have to at least raise. That's something for you for sure to talk to your labor and employment attorney about, if that's something you're going to do or considering doing. Whether or not librarians or other library workers would fall within this, again, so much of it depends on fact specific, the circumstances of their workplace, their duties, and especially their interactions, whether it's with other coworkers or their interactions with the public. So a couple of legal issues to consider if you do mandate, or even if you're strongly encouraging, requiring proof of vaccination, whatever that is that you decide as a policy. And that, again, is up to each library to make that decision on the policy. The legal side of things is, if you are going to mandate that your employees get vaccinated, there are two areas of exemptions that you do need to consider. And the first is an ADA accommodation. And you've probably run into this outside of the vaccination context, with just respect to people with disabilities that may require or request a reasonable accommodation. And this certainly applies here. There may be circumstances and medical conditions that preclude an employee from getting a vaccination, and their doctor may advise them that it's not safe because of their disability to get a vaccination. And in those cases, then an employer has an obligation to provide a reasonable accommodation. And reasonable is important. And again, this is something you would want to discuss with your attorney to make sure that you understand what that means. It doesn't mean, and we kind of encountered this a little bit with mask wearing, that we heard a lot about people, oh, well, I can't wear a mask because I have a disability. And the issue is, can you provide them a reasonable accommodation? A reasonable accommodation may not be, oh, okay, don't wear a mask and come into work. That's not reasonable in the context of making sure that the workplace is safe for patrons and for other coworkers. It might be a reasonable accommodation, might be work from home, but depending on their job, it may not be. If a particular employee cannot do their job from home, then it's not reasonable for them to request an accommodation that they be paid to be home if their work. But there are other reasonable accommodations that may work. That's something to work through with respect to the request, and then working with your lawyer on that. But some of the factors that you look at, the duration of the risk. So, is it something that they're more isolated in their job? They don't have a lot of interaction or contact with other people. What's the potential harm? What's the likelihood that something would happen that they, and some of the accommodations about PPE and distancing, that even if they're not vaccinated, you may be able to protect coworkers. So these are things to consider. Some of the other issues, leave of absence, telework. In the end, if the employer, so if the library has to take on significant expense, or it's very significantly difficult to provide an accommodation, then that accommodation is not reasonable. Again, it's very fact specific, as the ADA situations always are, because your employees, if they have a disability, it's not going to be the same for each one. So these are the things to consider if you are considering mandating, or if you're requiring people to provide proof of vaccination, that an employee should be able to request a reasonable accommodation, and that you have an obligation to provide it, again, if the request is reasonable. The other issue to be aware of is the religious accommodation. So this is under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. And in this case, an employee may come to you and say, my religious belief, a sincerely held religious belief, that's the legal language, prevents me from being vaccinated. It's similar, but not exactly the same as a medical accommodation. They have to, the employer has to provide a reasonable accommodation, unless, and in this case, the standard's a little different, unless the accommodation would result in undue hardship on the employer. It's a little easier for the employer in this case than under the ADA, to deny, to the extent that you cannot provide an accommodation, to deny the request. But again, these are things you want to work through. The point of this is not to provide you, every potential concern or legal issue, but to provide you with some ideas and tips that if these situations come up, this is something you want to run by your attorney. And it may. I had already heard in the mass context people coming in with requests for accommodations, and we had to deal with it then. We're certainly going to see it as the vaccine becomes more widely available to people, and as some employers make the determination that they do want to require, maybe not for every employee, but maybe for certain front-facing employees, that they be vaccinated. So I mentioned to you that the EEOC has a lot of great information. I think their FAQ for employers is really helpful. Lots of questions that you probably come up with every day, specific to vaccinations, but also to other issues related to COVID. I'm going to click on it, and then hopefully I'll be able to get back to the slides, but I wanted you to see. So this is the page specific about the laws and COVID-19, but you can scroll down and there's just a ton of information for questions for employers, but there's a whole section on vaccines, which is what we're talking about. Let's see, here it is. Subsection K. So if you have more detailed questions, you can't see it. Okay.
I can't.
So I'm going to provide a copy of the slides to everybody. So hopefully you'll be able to click, because I put a hyperlink in here. When you get the slides, you'll be able to click on this and then scroll through. For vaccines, it's subsection K. So when you click on this, you'll be able to scroll down about halfway through the page. And there's a dozen or more questions. But I just think it's well done. It's not too lawyerly, so it's not full of legalese. And I think you'll find I know I find it really helpful. I think you will too. Some of the other issues you need to consider, it's not just about mandating a vaccine, but it's also about asking questions and inquiring with your employees whether they've been vaccinated. So even if you don't require it, but you may require proof of vaccination, or the issue may come up, you have to be careful about the confidentiality of specific pre-screening questions or questions about vaccines. And this is especially true if the library is going to do vaccinations themselves. So let's say you bring somebody into the library to vaccinate your employees. I know some of my municipal clients are doing that. So they bring somebody in, or they do it themselves. Some municipalities have their paramedics vaccinating other paramedics, firefighters, police officers, and other frontline essential workers. If you're going to do this in-house, you need to be aware of some of the confidentiality issues. The giving of a vaccine itself is not an issue under the ADA. So actually providing a vaccine or asking somebody if they've had a vaccine is not a problem. But some of the pre-screening questions could be a problem. So some of the questions that you have to ask about whether they've had other vaccines, whether they have certain health conditions that might affect the maybe some of the side effects that they may get, those pre-screening questions could fall under some of the confidential ADA protected information. So if you're going to do that, make sure that you understand what those legal limitations are as well. Now, if you're just asking employees if they've been vaccinated or if they voluntarily agree to receive the vaccine, it's not an issue. But again, those pre-screening questions could be a concern. So if you ask for proof of vaccination, that's fine. You have the ability to do that. The EEOC has specifically said that's fine. It's not a legal concern, but you shouldn't ask why they got the vaccine. Sometimes that comes up in the context of, oh, you got the vaccine, well, but they were only doing 1A, 1B, whatever the time is. And it may be that they got the vaccine because of their health conditions. So be cautious about that. It's fine to say, provide us proof that you had it. We're keeping records of that, but not inquire too far into why. So I mentioned at the beginning, there's the difference between mandating vaccines and encouraging them. And the mandating implicates some of the legal issues with exemptions. Encouraging vaccines is not a problem. I think that most employers are doing that to protect, we not only have the protection of our patrons, but also OSHA requires us to provide a safe workplace. And so encouraging our employees to get vaccinations protects everybody in the workplace, not just people coming into the library. So it's certainly fine to do that. I've seen personnel policies that include language that we encourage you as employees to get vaccinated as soon as your group is available. So, some of us may be in 1C, some of us may be in group 2, which is the general population. Some of us may be in 1B, whatever that is, that you encourage employees to get the vaccine as soon as they can. I've heard of some employers using incentives. You may have heard it in the news. I think Dollar Store or Dollar Center was one that came and said that they were paying employees to get the vaccine. I've heard some employers are using paid time off as an incentive. I would say before you adopt any program like that, run that by your attorney. And the reason is, I don't think that there's an issue with the incentive itself to encourage them to get vaccinations, but to the extent that you have people with medical or religious exemptions who cannot, either their religion prevents them from doing it, or they have a medical condition that prevents them from getting a vaccine, that may put them at a disadvantage and could be seen as discrimination. So before you do it, run it by your attorney, whatever policy it is, and make sure that you aren't adopting something that could potentially create a discrimination claim. Voluntary programs, I mentioned this before, typically don't implicate any of these other laws. Again, as long as you're not discriminating against people with either a medical or religious exemption. So the other issue that has come up, and I've had some clients ask, can we adopt a policy that requires an employee who doesn't want to get a vaccine? So even if it's not mandated, but we're encouraging vaccines, to sign something that they refuse to do it. And what we're seeing is the answer is yes, that there is the ability for an employer to require them to sign a form of some sort. And the reason is because, we've got a lot of employee issues. They can't waive their workers' compensation benefits. That's clear. So we can't require them to sign a form saying, well, I waive any claims against you. Unfortunately, however, having that form could protect from some claims from somebody from the public. It could help the library in an investigation from OSHA on a safe workplace. That the library encourage our employees to get the vaccination to protect the workplace. This particular employee has refused to do so, and we have that form. It can also document that the employer, are providing information from trusted sources. So it's not just rumor of employees about vaccines, but that we're educating our employees through our personnel policies and through these forms that they should consult the CDC guidance and follow the CDC guidance, that the CDC is, and Illinois Department of Health is recommending that everyone that can get a vaccine, barring some exception, should get one. And so that's really what some of these personnel policies are trying to do, is provide education to the employees, but also provide a backstop protection in case there is some claim against the library. So I think I've covered everything that I wanted to cover, but I know, and there may be questions. I haven't checked the chat here. You guys can probably see. I can stop sharing my screen now. Okay.
Julie, this is Joe. Thank you for this. I think much of the what was going on in chat was just conversation around how the vaccine and the mask mandate sort of correlate, and some question of whether it's staff or patrons saying, now I don't have to wear the mask because I have vaccination, whether you can ask patrons to show evidence of vaccination. But I think through the chat, it was pretty clear that this mask mandate is still in effect regardless of they've been vaccinated, right?
Yeah, I think, there's two thoughts about this, but one is that the CDC has come out and said that it's not clear that of the vaccination itself, it's a 95% protection for the person vaccinated once they get the second shot, which is great. But there's still no evidence that that person who can still get the virus, right? It still comes into their body, but is fought off by the vaccination, that they can't spread it. So the CDC has taken the position, as has the state, that vaccination does not stop the social distancing and mask requirements. So somebody coming in and saying, oh, I've had the vaccine and here's my proof, because you do get a card or some proof of vaccination when you're vaccinated, that's not good enough. So the recommendations, or mandates for that matter, at the state level, so it's a recommendation by the CDC, but it's a mandate in Illinois that you wear a mask and you engage in social distancing. So I think that's the easy response to either an employee or a patron is, you still have to follow the rules. And if they refuse, then you enforce it.
One other question, Julie, do you think, or do we know that if a library were to require it and a staff member had sort of a severe reaction to the vaccine, do you think the library could be held liable?
Yeah, I mean, I hear that. So much of this is new. The vaccines are still under the emergency authorization. I suppose there could be a claim. It'd be difficult to tie it, frankly, to the library if there was a reaction from the vaccine itself. And there are a lot of protections offered, not just in the employment context, but toward immunity for government bodies. Could you be sued? Yes. I think it's a tough lawsuit for the employee to prove causation, that it was the library's fault that the individual had some reaction to the vaccine, but there's always the possibility. It's something to consider if you are going to mandate. Again, I'm not hearing a lot of employers mandating at this point. And the reason being, there just is, the vaccine is in such short supply. It just doesn't make a lot of practical sense. Some are talking about eventually doing that. So when it's more widely available, that to put in some sort of a mandate, maybe at that point, maybe not for every employee, but for those that have the highest. But yeah, there's the potential for lawsuits. There always are. I think they'd have a hard case to prove, though.
And maybe, go ahead, Dee.
I was just going to say there's a related question about other employees suing for an unsafe work environment if a staff member refuses to be vaccinated.
And that's, that's the, trading one lawsuit for another, right? So you mandate everybody get vaccines, and you've got people suing if they have a reaction or because they don't want one. And then the other side is, if you don't mandate it, then is it a safe workplace? Now, I think OSHA would say, and OSHA would be, the agency that governs the mandate of a safe workplace, would say, so long as the library and the employer is engaging in other safe practices, and that includes PPE, and making sure that people are following the PPE wearing and the social distancing and all of those guidelines, I think it would be more difficult to establish that the people have to mandate vaccine. I don't know which lawsuit I'd prefer to defend, maybe neither one of them. So, and again, I said this in the beginning, this is so new. There's very little out there. So we have to take what we can from other vaccines and other situations and say, okay, well, the courts looked at it this way for the flu vaccine, and try to apply it to this situation, which is so new.
There's also a question about if you could speak to the workers' comp law that the state passed in June, whether we are still required to report positive cases at our library to workers' comp insurance. The insurance carrier at this library has tried to tell them that that's no longer required.
Yeah, I would talk. Yeah, I would run that by your own attorney if there have been any changes in that. I'm not aware of changes that have said that. So, I can look into that and follow up. I would not just rely on your insurance carrier, though. That if it's a legal question, don't run it by an insurance company. Run it by your attorney. But I can also check into that too and see and follow up. And I see the other one is, if somebody refuses to be vaccinated, would you have to make an accommodation to them to work from home? And I would say the answer is no. If you have a mandated, if you mandate vaccines and a person refuses to get a vaccine and they have no exemption, so they're not claiming a medical or religious exemption, then they are not following a policy, and you can discipline them just as they don't follow any other policy. So there's no requirement of an accommodation unless it's in the religious or medical context. If somebody just doesn't want to do it, then, they may not want to be employed anymore. And I heard this, it sounds really harsh. This came up, I mentioned my husband's a fire chief, and he was hearing from a lot of the firefighters and EMS that they didn't want to get vaccinated, and that you couldn't force it. This was a long time ago. They're all getting vaccinated now, but at the beginning, when they just weren't sure, it was, oh, well, you can't force me. And the response is, you're right. We can't force you to get vaccinated, but then you just don't have a job anymore. So to the extent that somebody just refuses to follow one of your policies, then you have options. So, yep.
Okay, well, Want to thank you again, Julie, for a lot of useful information that I know many of you are wondering about. I do just want to do a quick plug, because if you want to get more information, we'll be having a webinar with HR Source next month, and they'll be talking specifically about the vaccine and employer options. Let me put the link here in the chat. And then I just want to acknowledge that we went 62 minutes without a COVID agenda item in the member update, which I think means progress in 2021 is going to be better. So, but I still think we have more to talk about on this topic. So thank you again, Julie. I will pass
thanks,
it
Julie.
back to Dee and Monica.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, yes, that was kind of remarkable. You're right, Joe. I think I'm going to turn it over to Monica to just a few more things on vaccines and COVID.
Thank you, Dee. We just want to make sure that everybody's aware of a few more efforts that are happening in this area. So there is a lot of interest from libraries that we are hearing about including libraries as places that can potentially provide vaccine sites. There are some libraries have noted that they're interested in that, as well as those who are just interested in providing opportunities for communication to their communities on vaccine education. So of course, as you noted in the chat earlier, Becky Sprafford and Kate Hall were also talking about the positive things that can happen with partnering with your local health departments and hospitals to provide educational programming and materials. A lot of them are already doing some of those things, and they have been, in some cases, delighted with libraries who are reaching out to provide some of that information as well. So that's certainly something that's available to you. But libraries are also being looked at in terms of these efforts by some national agencies, including Realm, ALA, and then, of course, the more local efforts that are happening. One thing we have heard about is some local libraries are including in their local letters that they are sending to their local health departments via the ILA template, is that they're including their history, providing things like flu shots or blood drives in their libraries, and making sure that these agencies are aware that libraries have helped in this way if that's something that there is potential for within your library. So we wanted to make sure you are all aware of that and know that there's a lot of interest in it, and we're sure to hear more as vaccine availability becomes more of a possibility in communities. ALA Council, also some of you might have heard, recently passed a resolution, recently just on Tuesday, I believe at midwinter, passed a resolution to classify library workers as a priority workforce in receiving the COVID-19 vaccine. This was a priority that was noted by many people who spoke up at the ALA midwinter membership meeting, as well as one that came to council via interest from the Public Library Association. I know that there are a lot of council members in Illinois, some of you who might be here, but that was a very interesting conversation and one that moved ahead. Some of you may have also seen that on January 19th, the CDC released a list of interim categories of essential workers that was mapped to standard industry codes that did include libraries in Group 1C. Now, of course, local states and local health departments can note people wherever they want them to be. This is really just a list of classifications, and it was just released January 19th. That was also a large piece of the conversation that happened via ALA Council, is whether or not there could be some potential to ask the CDC to reconsider those categories and put libraries in 1B, but that was part of the conversation, and I'll see if I can put that CDC link in the chat for those of you who may not have seen that, sorry. We also know that many of you are paying attention to the Restore Illinois mitigation plan update tiers. Many of your regions are being rolled back into a less restrictive phase, and some of you are considering different services at your library, have already changed your services to reflect some of the ways in which the Restore Illinois plan has been going. We just want to encourage you that if you're making those changes in your services, please continue to update the Rails reopening survey with those changes, and so that you can continue to look at the reporting tool and get the most accurate information about what's going on in your region and community. So just once again, as changes happen, please continue to use that survey. We have found just from checking what we're seeing online that you are, and we really appreciate all the updates that are happening. So thank you for that, but please continue to do that as well. And then finally, we just want to highlight an upcoming program from HR Source about the COVID-19 employer options that's coming up on February 24th at 10 a.m. That program will have some sort of similar and then maybe some different information in addition to the great information that Julie Tappendorf shared here today about how employers are addressing issues related to COVID-19. We can have a little longer form talk in that webinar. And so please join us for that. And if you cannot, that program will be recorded and available in the CE archive for 14 days following that February 24th program. And those are the updates that we have about COVID-19.
Thank you, Monica. Any questions at this point? Okay. So, and I'm just going to say just for a few minutes about an update on our equity, diversity, and inclusion work. We are continuing to meet with our Biz Lindsay, our consultant, to work on our own internal culture as well as our external culture in terms of how we relate to all of you and board members, et cetera. We also have a board committee that is working on these issues to advise Rails how we can help our member libraries with equity, diversity, and inclusion. The committee is meeting next on the 18th. We're trying to, at this point, we're developing an agenda. I see there's a question about any space to join the committee. Not at the moment. However, we do anticipate establishing some working groups to work on different aspects of this, perhaps, the HR aspects or, collection or recruitment of, the library, workforce. So stay tuned for that. Also, want to be, we know that ILA is working on this as well. We want to be sure that we, collaborate appropriately. They've done a survey that they have shared with us in terms of what, asking what the Illinois library community, what they see as the needs. And so we're looking at that as a basis for our next committee agenda as well. And we do have an EDI listserv. That's true. Thank you, Karen. And that has been posted into the chat. So we're just kind of, getting started on this. We do hope to be able to work with a small group of libraries, a cohort to kind of as a prototype project to how Rails can be helpful more generally to the membership. But it's early days yet. We're just getting started, but we'll keep you all updated. And I'm happy to answer any questions about any of that. Okay, well, that is our formal agenda. Now it's time for all of you to share any news or other questions or comments or any. Oh, that's a really good question. Is that you, Carol Meadow? Monica, can you speak to that?
Yes. Hi, Carol. So Carol's question was about, with Gale Cengage no longer handling Career Online High School, will Rails continue to support the platform fees with the new entity? Yes, we are meeting with the new entity. We've been talking to them about how they're providing support. They are really excited about the possibilities and how to move that forward. And so, yes, we are still at this planning to support the program, and that your folks who are currently involved in Career Online High School should really see no change. There are some different communication points that will happen for your libraries. And of course, we're really interested in hearing about your library's experience as it moves from Gale to the new group. So if you have any issues or anything, let us know so that we can help to work with that too. But yes, we are planning to support through the platform fee.
It's a really good question though. That's great news, Claire. Yeah. We hope that that kind of thing builds. So what else is going on out there? Anything else that is on your mind that we can do for you or look into? Yes, Mary Weimar, thank you. Yes, I saw your newsletter. That's great news. Congratulations. Completed its renovation in Orland Park. Question about any changes in quarantine because of the new variants of the virus. No, we haven't talked about that. We have talked about the fact that there is sort of national across the country. You know, lots of states are seem to be turning to the, perhaps a 24-hour quarantine period. We're evaluating that. We don't want to do anything without, making sure that we are understanding, the data and what's going on, and also talking to our partners at the State Library and in Heartland. Let's see, per capita use the last known census number. I would think so. I don't think we're going to know what the new number is until after April, is what I understand.
That's correct.
Be sure you check out our post pages for updates on the quarantine time, etc. And also, we just put up a new post page related to data, so check that out. I don't know if there's anybody from Rails who can talk about the EDI listserv. Oops, okay, let's go back to, okay, congratulations to Mount Morris, fine free. And cards for all students. You got a grant, that's great. How will libraries find out our service population after the new census is completed?
Well, for municipal libraries, it's going to be much easier, and there will be certifications with the Secretary of State's Index Division for the municipality. For library districts, we are working, or hopefully going to come to terms with SIUE and the LASA group, who's worked on delivery, to provide a mapping project that will assist library districts in ascertaining the exact population from the census data. It'll also give us a more informed discussion about the exact populations of the regional library systems, which that border doesn't really follow anything really consistently as well as it could, and also on the unserved in the state. So that's something still to come.
What else is out there, Mary, that we need to answer?
There's a question here about why Rails is investigating Patron Point for marketing and not Orange Boy.
I can answer that one, I think.
Go ahead, Monica.
Just in terms of, we had some interest in Patron Point, and so we had someone contact our deals and discounts group to kind of talk about that, and we're able to start that conversation. Of course, we are always interested. So if you have a specific product that you are really interested in Rails exploring to see if a group discount is a possibility through that vendor, please let us know, and we would be more than happy to investigate that. So I'll make sure that the team knows about your interest in Orange Boy, Angela, but if anybody has any other interest in specific group discounts for products, we're always happy to investigate whether or not that can be a good match for Rails.
Will new trustees get access to training from Veronica Thurman? Yes. We have on the Rails website. Joe, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, Veronica, I would just say for any new trustees, as long as you can get them set up with an L2 account, and obviously our administrative staff can assist with that. Once they have that L2 account set up, then they are able to access any of the recordings on our CE archives. They'll then have a way to access the login information they need for short dates for trustees, Trustee Academy, and then also signing up for any future CE. So that's really the best thing for them to do. And yes, thank you, Sarah, for mentioning that Atlas does their annual Trustee Training Day, which is coming up in May. So another great opportunity.
Monica, oh, sorry, Joe. There's a question that has Rails investigated a group discount for Hoopla?
I think when it comes to some of the products like Hoopla and Canopy, at this point, just because of the way that they're organized and how they're on the per download model, we haven't had much success in being able to negotiate a group discount with those groups. But we'll continue to talk with them and continue to try as they roll out some new products as well.
Yeah, we're well aware of how popular Hoopla is. Yeah. Let's see, did we miss anything? Yeah, the legislative meetups start tomorrow. Please go to the ILA website. You can sign up. It's really easy. They're virtual, really important. Thanks for all the information.
There's one question about the swank. A lot of interest in discounts. You see this question about the swank
No, I missed that
movie
one.
licensing. Is there a possibility that will include outside showings?
I don't know the exact question about the outside showings piece. I do know we've been in a lot of conversations with Swank because, of course, a lot of libraries haven't been able to have access to being able to show films because of the current environment. So there is a lot of conversations with Swank, but I'll ask about the outside. Oh, it looks like Nancy Ashbrook in there says Swank is now allowing outdoor movies, just came out yesterday. So we'll investigate that, but thanks, Nancy, for that update too.
All right, glad the update was helpful. I think there was, yeah, there's a lot to talk about these days, and I'm sure there will continue to be. So, you know, please feel free to, you know, suggest topics for future updates. So I think we'll adjourn at this point. Thanks, everybody, and we will talk to you and see you on Zoom very soon, I'm sure. Bye.